Hello, everyone. Welcome to the final session of the Jewish Impact Investing Summit, the hardest part of the how impact measurement. A big thank you to those of you who have made it with us all the way through. And I'd like to remind everyone that videos will be available after the summit on JLens' website. So this session is designed to introduce impact investors, Jewish impact investors, to the ideas and practices of impact measurement and management. Impact investing requires thinking about investing in an entirely new way. Done well, impact investing involves ongoing engagement and monitoring of an investment's social impact in addition to its financial return. This demands a link between the organization's financial side and its mission-oriented staff. So we have three fantastic panelists joining us for this session. I'd like to start with Charles Coustan. Charles is portfolio manager for impact investments at the MacArthur Foundation. Charles, the MacArthur Foundation has been making impact investments for a long time. And early on, the foundation focused on affordable housing and on community development, both in its grant side and in its impact investing portfolio. Can you tell us more about what did that early portfolio look like and how did you think about the impact of those early investments?
Yeah, thank you. So as you noted, we started early. We made our first impact investment in 1983, only 5 years after the start of the MacArthur Foundation. And the question we asked ourselves at that point is, how do we deploy our resources of the foundation to maximize impact? So with an approximately $6 billion endowment today, and our primary philanthropic tool being grant making, we wanted to explore what else we could do with those resources in order to create impact. And as you mentioned, we initially focused primarily on housing and community development investments. So all of those investments took the form of private investments. So they were historically long-term, low-interest loans, often 10 years in length, and they're focused geographically. So all of our investments were in the US. In terms of how we measured impact with that particular set of investments, there's kind of two levels we think about it. One is the end beneficiary. So who is the ultimate beneficiary of that investment? And so in affordable housing, for example, we would measure the number of affordable units that were developed or preserved through our loans. But we also think about things at a systems level. So how much capital was flowing into community development financial institutions, for example. And then with the housing developers, the way we made those loans, they were loans made to the developer themselves rather than on a project basis. And the intent there was to really improve the capacity for those developers to produce more over time. And as we invested in the community development financial institution marketplace over a period of time, one of the things that we observed is that the percentage of capital coming into that sector that was foundation and philanthropic early on when we were investing was the majority of the capital. Today, that's primarily bank capital. So we feel like we help seed and grow that market. So again, we're looking at things both at the beneficiary level as well as a more system-wide level.
Great, thank you, Charles. And then also following the foundation's evolution, as the foundation has grown, so has the impact investing team. So you're on the investment side. Can you share more? Where does impact measurement, impact monitoring live at the foundation? Is it on the investment side? Is it on the programmatic side?
Yeah. So so we have a dedicated impact investment team, as you mentioned. We happen to have the benefit being a relatively large philanthropy of having resources internally. So we have an evaluation team, and there's an evaluation officer who focuses specifically on impact investing, and she helps us in both strategy and execution of our impact measurement and management. But the day-to-day responsibility really falls with the investment professionals because we think it's important to measure the impact alongside the financial results and financial risk. So we combine the two things together. So that really falls to our team.
Great. So that's, in your case, it's good to hear you've incorporated the day-to-day responsibility into your impact investment team, but you also have support from the programmatic side, and in particular, somebody who is focused on measuring and evaluating. So this is a follow-up question. Do you experience any conflict ever? Is there ever a time when the programmatic person or the evaluator says, this investment aligns perfectly with our goals, this is a bullseye, and the investment team worries that you're going to lose all your money.
Yeah. So to distinguish, I mentioned the evaluation team. So they're more of an internal resource for the foundation generally, and do most of the emphasis obviously on the grant making work that we do, which is the primary philanthropic tool we use, but they also work with us on the impact investment. But then we have the grant making teams that drive the strategies around the grant making. And the way that we're organized on our team is that each member of our team is kind of matrixed into one of the philanthropic strategies. So for example, I have a colleague who works on our climate solutions team. I have another colleague who works on our Chicago focus team. And so they're sitting at the table with the grant makers, driving the strategies, developing the strategies and driving them. If an investment opportunity comes up through that collaboration with the program team, it's really up to the impact investment staff to do the due diligence, the closing, the monitoring, the management. So the opportunity identification can often come through this collaborative process with the grant making teams, but the actual investment itself is managed by our team. And we have a broader governance process within the foundation for managing and governing our work. So we have an investment policy statement that was developed that outlines how our governance works. So we have an impact investment committee that's a staff-based committee that can make certain decisions, and then larger investments get approved by our board of directors.
Great, thank you, Charles. And one thing I'm pulling out from what you said is that the institution has clearly thought very carefully about this, and you've integrated, as you mentioned, across teams, across grant making, across impact investing, and investing in general. And also you've gotten the institution's leadership bought in. There's an there's an investment policy statement that provides guidelines for this. So that support from all sides of the institution seems really important. I'd like to turn to another example from Greg Neichin. Greg is the director of Ceniarth. So Greg, welcome. And Ceniarth is an impact-first family office. And I'm hoping that you can share more what that means. I think many people on this call are familiar with a traditional investment process, what it means to vet an investment for financial return. What does the process look like at Ceniarth?
Sure. Thanks, Jacob. It's great to be a part of this event. Great to be alongside partners like Charles at MacArthur, and great to see so much enthusiasm from Jewish communal organizations about impact investing. I'm here today primarily with my Ceniarth hat on, but in a volunteer capacity, I chair the San Francisco Jewish Community Federation's work on impact investing. So I am a proud member of the tribe with a serious commitment to this work. So what does it mean to be an impact-first family office? Well, first, family office. We are not an institutional foundation. We exist to invest the assets and private foundation of one individual, Diane Eisenberg, also incidentally a proud member of the tribe. We're a team of 12 people. We manage around $400 million, all focused on impact first investing. We do 25 to 30 transactions a year. We make around $50 million in new commitments annually. So we're busy and we move pretty nimbly, given we have one decision maker and a team that's solely focused on this work. That's the family office piece. The impact first piece. Well, what is impact first? Impact first is exactly what it says. We exist to generate impact first and foremost. For us, impact means deploying capital to improve livelihoods in the most marginalized, vulnerable communities on the planet. We work everywhere from the Mississippi Delta in the United States to smallholder farming communities in East Africa. And what I'd say is the great common denominator across all of the places we work is long-term structural neglect and disinvestment. And successful interventions in these communities, and I'd say even before the COVID crisis, and certainly even more so now, need low cost, below market, we can use the word concessionary capital. And I will emphasize this is not sort of double bottom line capital. This is truly low cost capital to make most of these interventions work. I'll add that there are plenty of wonderful things that people can do to align their money in double bottom line ways. And thank God more and more people are doing it. We think it's great. My main point is that there are missions such as ours to support deeply marginalized communities that really can't be served without some sacrifice.
Great, and so then that affects, Greg, your pipeline of investments, in that you start the vetting process not just on the financial side but also on the impact side. You early on screen out an investment, both sort of from a financial perspective but also from an impact. It doesn't have some whiff of impact there.
We do. I mean, I would say that this impact first philosophy is baked into everything we do at Ceniarth. So we don't cast a wide net. We don't say, hey, world, bring us impact investments and we'll see what we think. I think we start from very defined problem statements. Say, for example, how do we best support small and micro businesses in persistent poverty regions in the United States? Then we go map that landscape. We look for the best financial intermediaries and supporting infrastructures that are in these communities, many of which are the CDFIs that Charles just mentioned. And then we assess the type of capital they need. We conduct the kind of rigorous diligence process that Dahlia was alluding to in her previous presentation. And then we set impact targets, we measure them, and we base renewals on achieving those objectives. So it's not really rocket science. It's really just having impact at the heart of everything we do.
Thank you very much, Greg. I'd like to introduce Leticia Emme, Senior Manager at the Global Impact Investing Network, or the GIIN, with a focus on impact measurement and management. So Leticia, most of the institutions in JLens network are familiar with a traditional investment process. Many may not have experience with impact investing, or the question of how to measure the impact of an investment may not have ever come up. So when you think about impact measurement, measuring the impact of an investment, who should be sitting around the table to discuss the impact of our investments? What do you see from the GIIN's network? Is this something that's best housed within the investment team? Should it be a programmatic team? Staff? Should it be senior leadership?
Well, thank you for having me. And that's a great question. And actually, I would say, there's no one specific way. We see, across, not only across the GIIN network, but broadly in the impact investing market, we see this happening in different ways. I think similar to what, Charles was saying. So the GIIN conducts a state of the impact measurement management survey every 2 years, and we launched the most recent version in January this year. And so I'll tell you what we see from there, which is the most recent representation of the market. What we see there is that about just close to 70% of respondents, which are all impact investors, say that they integrated into the responsibilities of the investment team. But also half of them say they also have dedicated IMM staff. And then similar to, I think, what we were all saying, we see about 40%, just under 40% of investors where, IMM is a key responsibility of the senior leadership team.
And I'm just going to interrupt you, Leticia, to spell out IMM as impact measurement and management for folks who may not know.
Apologies for that.
No,
yes.
That's okay. Go ahead.
And then about just under 40% also, have impact measurement and management as a key responsibility of the senior leadership team. And this shows us, wow, there's, so much buy-in. I think exactly what, Charles was saying, which is great, because then we see how, at the top level, decisions are being made, not just looking at, financial aspects, but also impact aspects as well.
Great. And then Leticia, a follow-up question. Where do you see questions about impact being brought in, and where do you think they should be brought in? Meaning, at what stage in the investment process? Is this something that comes at the end of the process? Is it something that should come at the beginning?
You know, in an ideal world at the beginning, and I think similar to what Greg was saying, you know, right from the start, you know, you start by identifying, what are your impact objectives? What do you want to achieve? You know, are you looking at, marginalized populations without access to financial services? Are you looking at, providing quality healthcare, education? So from the early on, that will help you also, screen potential investments. And as you do your due diligence, there are different ways of doing it. There are some investors that will conduct a full impact due diligence, and so they'll have a due diligence questionnaire that is only, focused on their impact side, and then they'll compare that with the financial due diligence. Or there are other ways, maybe, if you're just starting, maybe just integrate a few impact indicators into your, financial due diligence questionnaire. And then as you, make the investments on an ongoing basis, you want to be measuring, because that's where you see, are there any adjustments that we need to make sure that we are, hitting those targets or accomplishing our objectives. And what we wouldn't want is to do it at the end. You wouldn't want, after you exit an investment, it's like, oh, did we accomplish our impact? Because that will be too late, and maybe you missed out on, tremendous value-adding opportunities, or you hit on risks that you could have avoided had you done it earlier on.
Great, thank you very much. And I appreciate the encouragement also for institutions getting started with the process, how to begin thinking about impact, managing and monitoring the impact of your investments. And I have a question for Greg about that. Greg, when you and I last spoke, you thought that you sort of had a piece of advice that for a lot of institutions in JLens network, it might be easier than they think to measure the impact of their investments, in that it's a skill set that many organizations already have. Can you elaborate a bit on that advice? Sure.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know if it's easier, but it's certainly a skill set that I think that organizations have. I think that the field of impact investing is one dominated by finance professionals and MBAs who think they are far more clever than they really are, and who feel the need to reinvent the wheel just to claim that they've invented it. So I think those of you who come from grant-making institutions, and I think that many on this call, this event, do, you don't make grants without expecting data on outcomes. At least I hope you don't. So you today are measuring impact. And I think that the philanthropic sector has a long history of measuring impact, and has rigorous, sophisticated tools for M&E, for monitoring and evaluation. Now, we can argue that sometimes those tools are too rigorous, and to be honest, we at Ceniarth have been investing in platforms like 60 Decibels that are trying to give us deeper customer level insights without the cost of large scale randomized control trials. But the shortcomings of sort of traditional M&E aside, the tools are there. Many of you know the outcomes that you want to see in your communities. You don't necessarily need an impact investing professional to tell you that. You certainly might need their help to structure financial targets and specific performance metrics, and you might need close collaboration with them to figure out what's reasonable to expect from a given investment intervention. But you don't, and in my opinion, shouldn't feel intimidated when it comes to these impact measurement discussions. And in many ways, it's your turf as a traditional grant maker.
Thanks, Greg. And a follow-up question about that. You sort of hinted at this, that this requires a collaboration that is sort of a new kind of collaboration between the grant-making side, or the side that has the experience with measuring and evaluation, and the financial side, or the investment side. And would you say that sort of collaboration is an important piece of this?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we have the luxury of a family office of not having these institutional silos. So we get to think without the walls. And I guess that for me, the most sophisticated way we can think about these questions is really the simplest way we can think about these questions, which is to say that, let's view grant making, impact investments, guarantees, any other mechanism that you can dream up for moving money from your institution to a recipient. And whether you call that recipient a grantee or an investee, it doesn't really matter. These are money moving mechanisms. These are tools. And whether we are impact investors or grant makers, we have the same goal as funders, which is how do we maximize impact in the most capital efficient way possible. So we should really be defining the specific problems that we're trying to solve first in our communities, and then backing into these tools second. I always feel like if we lead with tools, we're a hammer and everything we see is going to be a nail. And I think that despite what those armies of impact investing MBAs are trying to tell us all, impact investing is not a silver bullet for every challenge out there. The last point I'll make is that, at JCF in the past month, we raised over $5 million to make an interest-free recoverable grant to Hebrew Free Loan to expand their ability to make loans to businesses and individuals impacted by the COVID crisis in our community here. And I would say that this was a good example of something prompted by a specific need in the community that led to an assessment of the right tool to use, and now will be carefully monitored for impact. So, I think that's the sequence of how to do this and how you get the right people in the room to do that. I'll leave that to the magic of all your own organizations, but that to me would be the ideal.
So Leticia, let's go a little deeper into the, not too deep into the technicalities, but a little deeper into the practice of impact measurement. So you shared with me a framework of 5 questions an institution can ask when it wants to measure whether its investments are having an impact, whether they're aligned, whether they're moving things forward in a meaningful way. Can you walk us through that? And can you also share at a high level how that relates to your work at the GIIN with the IRIS Plus framework, and tell us what that is?
Absolutely. So a few years ago, the Impact Management Project started a collaboration with stakeholders across the world to just come together and say, how do we define impact in a common way? What does it, when we say impact, what do we mean? And this collaboration of stakeholders basically came out with what is called or referred to as the 5 dimensions, which basically say, when we talk about impact, we need to be answering 5 questions, which respond to that: what, who, how much, contribution, and risk. So what are you trying to achieve? For whom? So who do who is going to be receiving the, we're experiencing the effects of this intervention? How much of a change are you expecting to, create, both in terms of scale as in terms of depth? Contribution, looking at what is the contribution that, how is this different to what would have happened anyway? And then the risk looks like, what is the impact risk? What is the risk that the impact that you're trying to achieve might not happen? So this makes a lot of sense. Every time we talk about this with people, say, yes, that makes a lot of sense. And then one thing we found at the GIIN, and we have been working on IRIS for over 10 years. IRIS is a catalog of metrics that is widely used by impact investors to identify what metrics to use to measure their impact performance. And as we were evolving, IRIS to something more than just metrics, one thing that we kept hearing is, we understand these 5 dimensions of impact, that makes a lot of sense. Like, the problem is, like, how do I bring down this to my portfolio? How do I now get metrics that map these 5 dimensions? How do I do it depending on what my objective is? And so that's what we do with IRIS Plus. IRIS Plus is a public good. Anybody can go to the web and find it. And yeah, it helps investors really, communicate their impact, measure and communicate their impact in a common way in alignment with this convention of the 5 dimensions.
Okay, thank you very much, Leticia. We have some really interesting examples in the MacArthur Foundation and Ceniarth on the call. I want to ask, for the sake of smaller institutions who may not be as large as MacArthur, who may not be able to afford that kind of dedicated staff time, and who may not be impact first, may not be family office, might have other stakeholders, might have fiduciary needs. What do you all think? Would you have advice for those kinds of institutions? Is in-depth impact measuring of investments the kind of thing that only a large institution can do? What should an institution with small resources do? So I'll turn that first to Leticia and to share what you see from your network, and then I'd love to hear Charles and Greg also what you think.
Well, I would encourage everybody to be, mindful of the impact of their investments. All investments have an impact, whether you have the intention to do it or not. And, it doesn't need to be super complicated. I think that's one of the things that with Iris Plus, we really have been able to help people. You don't need to, Greg's point, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Don't think that this is something that you need to do. There's organizations that have worked on this for decades and have, brought forward frameworks that you can just take and use. So even if you start small and with just a few metrics you probably already have, you don't need to go into a super complicated framework. You don't need to start collecting data that nobody will ever use. Just focus on pieces of data that are valuable for you and for your investee, and grow from there. That's their advice.
Great, thank you, Leticia. And then Charles and Greg, the same question, words of encouragement or advice for smaller institutions or institutions with other constraints and fiduciary responsibilities.
Yeah, a couple of things I would say. So both Greg and Leticia made an important point about having an intention and having a target up front. So if you're clear about what you're trying to accomplish, that's an important first step. The other thing I'd build on that, in addition to the metrics and the approach that Leticia was talking about, is the qualitative component of it. And that's something that's fairly simple and straightforward. And if you're just trying to learn what did you accomplish, sometimes the metrics get in the way and you end up sort of counting units and you miss the bigger picture. And ultimately you're trying to learn, right? What did what I intended to happen or not? And what learnings happened along the way? And oftentimes things play out slightly differently. And why did they turn out differently? And what can you learn from the experience along the way? So we ask our investees on an annual basis in a semi-structured way just to reflect on their experience. And to build on a point that Greg made, as a grant-making institution, we ask those kinds of questions of our grantees. What reflections, what learnings do you have? So we try to take that learning and growth mindset and we apply that to our impact investing as well.
Thank you.
I guess not
Greg.
much. Yeah, not much to add. I think they covered that well. I'd say the only other thing I might offer is to look for collaboration in deals. So you may be a small impact investor in a deal, but you may be in that deal alongside others who have more resources and who actually are doing much more of this impact measurement. I find that this is a very collaborative field. If anyone in a deal wanted to see the kind of work we were doing to monitor that deal, we would certainly we'd certainly share that. I know we benefit a lot from technical assistance grants that many of our investees get for impact measurement. So it's not just us having to fund this alongside of our investing work. And then lastly, I'd encourage conversations with investees to help them understand why collecting this data and perhaps investing their own resources in more data collection like this furthers their mission and improves their enterprise.
Great. Thank you very much, Greg. I want to thank all of our panelists, Charles, Greg, and Leticia, and all of the panelists over the past 2 days. Thank you to everyone who has made it with us to this final moment of the summit. And the goal of the summit was really to move the conversation forward in the Jewish community from the why to the how of responsible investing, of impact investing. We know that the impact investing, responsible investing arena is only going to grow, and these conversations are only going to continue to be more and more important. And advancing the Jewish community, advancing Jewish leadership is only going to grow more important. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you for taking the journey with us. Stay safe, stay well. We hope to see you soon at the next JLens event.